Trek favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. This is the show where you get to hear about some of the favorite Star Trek episodes of some of my friends, both tech friends and Trek friends. This time, I'm really excited to welcome Steve and Barb Sande. Steve, you may know from some of my shows on Mac Voices. I think this is the first time we've ever gotten Barb to get on camera. So guys, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
And thanks for inviting us. I tell you, when we heard about Trek Favorites, I got really, really excited. And probably one of the biggest reasons I wanted to have my better half with me here is that, we're both lifelong Trekkies. Or Trekkers, whatever the proper terminology is. But we started watching the show literally when it first came on, back when the original series was on the air. And, back in the days when we were in college, the big thing to do was to go to one of the TV rooms in the dorms, and you'd sit there and everybody would be watching Star Trek in syndication. And we're still watching Star Trek. We watch reruns all the time. Of course, we've got a lot more choice now than ever. But
well, I was going to say when he brought this up, we were at a Rockies game, and within 10 minutes, I had a list of favorite episodes from all of the different series. I think that my favorite series so far. And I have to admit, I confess, I haven't watched Discovery. We have not watched that yet. We plan to, but my favorite series is Deep Space Nine. After all of when it's said and done, Deep Space Nine is the most realistic and really looks at the characters in depth, has some interesting character experiences, has some of the top-rated episodes ever in Trek. And so I look at Deep Space Nine as a wealth of resources for us to talk about things that are fascinating and kind of the anti-Roddenberry of the Trek universe, so to speak.
No offense to Rod.
No offense to him, but he created it. So anyway, let's continue on here.
Well, yeah, but I have to comment. I find that really interesting. Just the fact that DS9, I'm like, there is no bad Trek, okay, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But some people have some very strong feelings about DS9, about Discovery, about the way that the franchise has evolved and how it's branched into different things. And so I'm really excited to have you on as someone who appreciates and has DS9 as their favorite. Barb, I know a lot of the folks know Steve from Mac Voices, but I wanted to just touch on your background as well, because you have a bit of a formal aeronautical background.
Yes, I retired a year and a half ago from Lockheed Martin, and I was a senior staff engineer and systems expert. Worked in a group called Mission Success for most of my career. I worked 25 years of my 37 years there on the Titan launch vehicle program, including some missions like the Cassini mission to Saturn, a lot of incredibly important classified missions for the government that we launched for the Air Force.
She's going to have to shoot you now that she said that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to tell you anything about anything that was classified. Well, it was a long, wonderful career, and I got there by being a space nut since I was a kid. Happily celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission this last weekend, and of course it's still ongoing. 50 years ago tomorrow would be the day they splashed down, and that was an impetus for me to become an engineer when girls weren't engineers. So I became an electrical engineer by training, and then an aerospace engineer by career. So it's been awesome, and I loved it. And Trek was part of that.
No, that's great. And I wanted to establish that background just because I find it really interesting that someone that was in that as a profession also enjoys, this side of things.
Well, most of us did, quite frankly. So it was very popular. In fact, very quick story. I recall we were on a launch at Vandenberg, and on a review team out there, it was the night that Next Generation premiered with Farpoint, Encounter at Farpoint episode. And we all retreated to our own rooms there at the Embassy Suites in Lompoc, California, and we watched it. This is pre-iPhone days. You couldn't text anybody. Steve was watching it here at home, and then we all got together afterwards. What did we think? And so it was this discussion of the new generation of Star Trek. And Encounter at Farpoint is only interesting because it introduces Q and the crew. That's really the only things that are interesting about that episode. But it was new Star Trek. It was a new series. And all of us were very much into it. So just to let you know.
That's great. Well, you decided, and I want to make sure I get it right, this is episode 19 of season 6 of Deep Space Nine, In the Pale Moonlight. Yeah. And so I ask everyone, and you can both answer or team tag it however you want to do it, but what is it about this particular episode that resonated? Because this is a very powerful episode.
Well, first, I don't know how many people understand kind of the story behind the name of the episode. But what movie was it again?
It was the Tim Burton Batman from 1989.
Right. With the great line.
It was from the Joker, Jack Nicholson.
Yeah. Yes. Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? In other words, making that deal with the devil, so to speak. And that's where, if we just start from there, let's go. Let's talk about it.
Well, Benjamin Sisko is probably the most interesting and complex captain of the captains. He's not the flyboy like Archer. He's not Kirk's a flyboy too. He's not the suave diplomat like Picard. He's not the mothering woman who's concerned about getting everyone back in Voyager and concerned that because she might have caused it, now she's responsible for getting everyone across the Delta Quadrant back to the Alpha Quadrant. So Sisko is the most, and of course the first 3 seasons I believe he's a commander, and then he's promoted to captain. But he's on a space station that has the opportunity for unlimited exploration with the wormhole, the stable wormhole. But that leads to some of the most dire consequences for the Alpha Quadrant and for the Federation, which it brings into the Alpha Quadrant, the Dominion. And the Dominion are one of the worst enemies ever faced by the Federation. They're not quite as frightening as the Borg. They don't assimilate people, but they use the carrot and stick principle to bring systems into line. They have the founders who are the shapeshifters like Odo, who are there in the background, and they want order in the universe. So they have created the Vorta, who are a series of clones who are the carrot. They're the diplomats. Behind the carrot are the genetically engineered warriors, the Jem'Hadar. So Sisko, by bringing the station to the wormhole, they bring in this terror from the Gamma Quadrant. So it's an interesting background. That's kind of the backstory in my mind. But things are not going well. They get into war. Obviously, the war happens.
The end of season 5.
Yes, season 5, A Call to Arms, and things have happened before then with the Dominion, and especially with the Jem'Hadar, that have led to this situation. Of course, Deep Space Nine is overtaken by the Cardassian Dominion Alliance. It is part of another backstory, and they turn it back into Terek Nor, and some people are still on there, like Kira, Garrick, some of those great characters. And the rest of them get off, and they're on the Defiant when that happens. But they get back the station, and they're back on the station, but the Federation is losing ships every day. Every day they're losing people that are not meant to be warriors. They're meant to be explorers. They're meant to carry the message of the Federation out into the universe.
In other words, the Roddenberry influence.
Exactly.
Explore the universe, go out. Well, if you want to put it that way, it's actually, God, I can't think, Cochrane's, words.
Right.
To seek out new life, new civilizations, to go boldly where no man has gone before.
Right.
And, that's been the story so far. And then suddenly things change.
Right. Well, and Cisco is an interesting character. He's family driven. He has his son, Jake, and his father, there are several great episodes with his father. At one point, he thinks his father is a changeling. He thinks he's a shapeshifter. And now with the war going as badly as it is, there's this huge resource of power that's just sitting there in the upper end of the Beta Quadrant. That can they use them? The Romulans. And the Romulans and the Federation, of course, have a long history of conflict, a long history of dislike for each other. But the Romulans even didn't like the Dominion. So they jumped into this early on with the Tal Shiar going with the Obsidian Order from the Cardassians to try to destroy the Shapeshifters' planet. In an earlier episode, I believe I was in season 5. Unsuccessful. Kills everybody. Yeah. Nobody survives that. And now they've signed a non-aggression pact with the Dominion. That's what the Vorta are good. Wei-Yun is the Vorta that is the face of the Dominion. He's got the smooth words, the carrot and the carrot. He says, we can sign a non-aggression pact. We can be friends. We will not take over your system. And he does this with multiple systems, while the backside of the Dominion is taking them over in a military sense with the Jem'Hadar. And so Cisco is between a rock and a hard place. What do I do? We're losing people every day in the Federation. What can we do? So,
and that's where things get kind of interesting in this episode. Early on, kind of as a setup for the entire rest of the episode, they're looking at the list of casualties that Cisco puts up every Friday. And Dax goes up and she sees somebody on the list who she knows it's actually a ship that had been destroyed. And it's quite upsetting to everybody there. And the comment is made, that it really, I'm looking at my notes here. But it'd be great if we could bring the Romulans into this and help us out. And that's just kind of a off comment. It really, doesn't come out as a big piece of information there. Bashir makes a similar comment.
Right.
And, you just kind of hear this going on. And all of a sudden, it just, as he's seeing all these people really upset by having a friend or a relative or, a former crew member from another ship dying in this war that is just not going well for the, it's just not going well at all for the Federation. It's horrible. He finally makes this, great little speech. The entire premise behind this is we see this as a flashback. If you take a look at it, Cisco is in his room. He's got a drink. He's kind of sipping. He's loosening his clothing up. And he's kind of going through this, trying to justify what he has just done. And what he does is really pretty horrible. But he makes this one comment. He says, that was the moment I made the decision. It was like I'd stepped through a door and locked it behind me. I was going to bring the Romulans into the war. And that sets off a wonderful chain of events. Not so wonderful if you happen to be the Romulans, because you're going to kill off a lot of folks there. But for the Federation, a pretty good thing that happens.
Well, of course, what does Cisco do to set this plan in motion. He goes to one of the most enigmatic and wonderful characters on Deep Space Nine, who should have had billing above the credits. He really should have, because he was in so many episodes. Andrew Robinson played Garrick in many episodes. Elam Garrick, who is an exiled Cardassian. You never understand why he was exiled. He was left on Terek Nor when Cardassia left it, and it was turned over to the Federation. He's a simple, humble tailor now. He makes lovely clothing. He's congenial. He's interesting. He becomes best friends. Genteel. He becomes best friends with Dr. Bashir. They have lunch every day. And you don't really start seeing the backstory on Garrick until later in Deep Space Nine. And you find out that not only was he in exile, and you never really understand why, but he was a member of the Obsidian Order, which is the elite military intelligence group of Cardassia. You know, the Cardassians are military by nature. They subjugated the Bajorans for decades, had them enslaved. That's why Kira was a terrorist. She was one of the people who fought against them. And Garrick, has his little secret paths of information with people in Cardassia. Of course, now the Dominion has joined in forces with the Cardassians to expand their empire and to expand their domination of the Alpha Quadrant. So Sisko goes to Garrick to see what we can find out. Is there something in the works for invading the Romulan Empire on the part of the Dominion? They've signed a non-aggression treaty. The Romulans do not care what happens to the Federation. They even allow the Cardassian Dominion forces to attack ships in the neutral zone. What do they care? So any thoughts, Chuck? Do you want to ask any questions at this point, or should we just keep babbling away?
Well, a couple things. I mean, I don't know that we have to go through all the plot details because this is an older show, obviously, and folks can go and find the summary on Memory Alpha.
Right.
What intrigued me was the idea that, and look, I say this, it seems like every episode, it's a TV show, right?
Right. It's a TV show. It's 48 minutes.
Right. But that said, that one individual decides that he is going to alter the course of the war at any cost. Yes. I'm sure that wars throughout history, there have been a lot of people that thought that, and probably tried to do a lot of things of questionable natures. But here you see,
I was going to say, General Curtis LeMay became much more powerful in the Army Air Corps at the end of World War II. And starting in February of 1945, the U.S. military made decisions to do fire bombings of cities, not just pattern specific target daylight bombing, but they worked with the British over in Europe and then on their own over in the Pacific. And they did scattered wide civilian death type bombings in Dresden, Germany, Tokyo, Japan, other places like that. So it was a decision that was made that when you look back on it in retrospect, it was like, was that a moral decision? But I think the thought was we need to accelerate and get to the end of this war. You have to stop it.
Yeah, and there were several things that were coming up at that point in World War II. And we love making, we've talked about this before, kind of a parallel there. A lot of deaths going on. There were, at one point, I think there were estimates that the U.S. would have seen approximately 1 million deaths. That was just the armed forces. If you took a look at the civilian deaths for the Germans and for the Japanese, it was going to be huge, giant number. So it was one of the situations, kind of like what Sisko is drawn into, where it's not a good thing. It's a horrible thing. It's a horrid situation. But you look at it and say, can I bring the end of this war, closer to us by doing this horrible thing? Can I do that? For LeMay and for, obviously the leaders during World War II, the decision to go in and do things like the firebombing of Dresden and Tokyo and some of these other cities.
And dropping the atomic
bomb
yeah.
on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Very, very just, you wonder what those people went through in terms of just thinking about the morality of the decision that they were making. But in the end, they kind of looked at it, and as we get from Cisco at the end of this episode, he says, can I live with it? Yes, I can. They realized that,
go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, Barb, I think you said this was sort of the anti-Roddenberry thing, and it definitely is, because the Roddenberry philosophy would hold you to a higher standard, and we've seen some of that in some other Trek shows, that you hold yourself to that standard, possibly, maybe even probably, to the detriment of yourself, and maybe to the detriment of the Federation. And here you have Cisco, flipping that around and saying, "Yeah, I made that deal with the devil, but I can live with it."
Right.
And anything I personally say beyond that, this then starts to turn into justification. Are you saving lives? Are you preserving a way of life? Well, those are all justifications, and it comes down to a very personal choice of, can you live with that?
Can you live with it? And I think he can, and I think he can't, because after he records his personal log, the last thing he says is, "Computer, erase this personal log." He doesn't want it on record, that the back thinking that he's going through during this period of time, and everything falls into place for him. Because seriously, they want to get the Romulans in. So then what happens? The Dominion invades Beta Z. Well, for crying out loud, what do you do now? Of course, you might say Beta Z is a good target because of Luxana Troy, but I have to say, I'm just kidding. She's okay. Deanna's better, but Beta Z's a known long member of the Federation. They're close to the center of the Alpha Quadrant. The Dominion is near now Vulcan and Teller and Andor and Alpha Centauri and even Earth. They're near these places. So it's like it almost falls into his lap that this happens, that happens, and that he makes the pact with the devil with a person that has absolutely no moral conscience, Garak.
Well, and it's so funny, too, because it sets off this chain of progressively worse things that he's doing to set this all into place.
Right.
Garak says, well, we can get this guy to make this wonderful simulation and stick it on looks like a real live
it's an actual
photolithic
it's an optolytic memory rod.
And we can put it on this, and everything's going to be fine. But by the way, to get this done, we're going to need, or to get this rod, we're going to need 200 liters of the biomimetic gel,
right.
Which is that's like asking somebody, by the way, in order to do this favor for you, could you go out and get me highly refined plutonium? Just a couple of pounds, nothing, no problem. So he's asking, a huge amount. Cisco just goes, sure, no problem, we'll get it. He makes the command to Bashir. Bashir's like, what are you doing? And this is
I'm not going to do it. I need a written order.
This is an order. Here's the written order.
Right.
Do it. It's a much smaller amount that they're able
they're able to negotiate. But all these little things that snowball are like the personal decisions that we make in our personal lives. Like if you have a relative who's on life support, and do you reach that point that there's no point in going further with them, or do you try? And so you get a lot of other inputs, a lot of voices. but yet still to this day, I might think to myself, because my mom went through that and she died of a stroke and was taken off of life support, I still feel guilty about it. I still feel like it was the right decision, but was it? So it's the moral code that we're all ingrained with. And is it the right decision or not?
Yeah, and that's what really makes this episode so compelling, is that it's this horrible decision that he's making, and he's, setting forth an even worse war. If the Romulans do come in, it's bringing in this huge force. Things are going to get a lot nastier.
It actually accelerates the end of the war.
It does accelerate the end of the war. Things do end up turning out okay, I guess you could say. But at the
cost of his conscience.
Billions of lives, too.
Yeah.
But to skip ahead a little bit, one thing that fascinated me was, okay, he's willing to make all these compromises. He's willing to make that deal with the devil. And the deal with the devil was not successful because the subterfuge was found out, and
it's a fake.
Yeah, yeah, almost as good as Khan. But then we see that Garrick has as Garrick does, has manipulated the situation to achieve the ultimate objective at a cost beyond what Sisko had anticipated. No matter how much Sisko has anticipated, Garrick took it further. And yet Garrick did what he needed to do to actually get to achieve the objective.
Right.
And that's where Sisko, it was almost like, okay, Sisko had taken himself to a limit. In spite of the fact that it didn't matter to him what it took, there was still an implied limit that he would not have gone beyond. And Garrick took it and went beyond that, achieved the objective, and Sisko went back and started beating up on Garrick, and Garrick confronted him with, look, this is what you wanted, and yes, a couple entities died, aliens died because of this, but we achieved the objective, and that sets in motion a whole new set of thinking, I guess, about, okay, what does at any cost mean? And when you go and make a deal with another devil, I've just found that I found it like, okay, we hit a second level there, and then Sisko comes back and he's not sure he can live with it, but he thinks he can live with it, and you end the episode with, you get the feeling that he's going to be conflicted with this for probably the rest of his life.
Well, and what's interesting about Sisko is we know what he is. He's not just Benjamin Sisko. He's a prophet. He's one of the wormhole aliens. He's of that super race of beings, and so that may come into his thinking a little bit too. Is that I've let myself down as the emissary of the prophets, because I've been playing this role as the emissary for several years now on Deep Space Nine, and for the Bajorans in particular. And now I've done this. But there's so many conflicted characters in Deep Space Nine. That's why I really like that series. Kira Nerys is a wonderful Bajoran, very faithful, very hardworking. She fits in. She becomes good friends with the crew. But she was a terrorist. She actually did terror activities to drive the Cardassians off of Bajor.
That's another interesting parallel, and that's a whole nother show.
It's a whole other series of shows.
You get into this. This is wartime, and in war, certain things are done that in peacetime you would consider immoral, but that's kind of what a war is. And so, I'm not making any excuses or advocating anybody's position here.
No,
there are choices that are made, and I think this episode really does illustrate the difficulty of some of those choices and the consequences and the regrets.
Well, I think where the big decisions in a war that are the most hidden, but also the most compromising to a person's sense of morality, are in the areas of espionage and being an agent and gathering information, and the fact that you have to lie about what you are, what you're doing, um, and risking your life and other people's lives to gather information. So what you find out with Garrick is he's trying to first do it the right way. He's going to gather information from his operatives on Cardassia Prime, and everyone he contacts is killed by the Dominion. Everyone that he contacts is killed by the Dominion. So he says to Cisco, "You must admire their efficiency." So he tries to do the right espionage way of getting information. Someone who can tell him, "Yes, I overheard in this meeting that they are planning this, and I can give you information." And they're killed. So the Dominion is absolutely a nonstop force of evil. You can say that they are evil in that they want to control everything and everyone's lives, because that's what the founders want.
But was that a plot hole? Because if the Dominion's intelligence was that good and Garrick was making these inquiries, then you would think that a red flag would have gone up somewhere, that there was something, some subterfuge going on.
It might have fallen under the radar. And you're right, it could be a plot hole. The fact that these operatives were killed right after they were having contacts with Garrick. And that when the Romulan Empire comes back to the Cardassian Dominion alliance and says, "You did this. You killed Vreenak. You had this discussion about invading the Romulan Empire. You did all of this." And they would deny it, up and down and left and right, and their denials would be for nothing. So Garrick, by doing what he did, had minimal damage for getting the maximum effect out of it. And he knew that that's what he had to do. And of course, he takes care of the collateral damage by killing Tolar. And of course, Tolar was going to be killed by the Klingons anyway. But
so you could say it's kind of a wash there.
Yeah.
We don't even know what race he's from, what planet, so.
Well, but again, I mean, that's all part of the dance with the devil thing.
Exactly.
There's so many people dancing with so many devils here that it looks like a prom. And, you try to figure out that's the title is very intriguing because there's so many levels that you're trying to figure out who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. There may be no good guys here. It's almost who's the least bad guy and who's the most bad guy. And
Right.
and that intrigues me. And Barb, your comments about, intelligence gathering. I mean, I think it's to be in that particular profession, you have to have a very strong sense of which side you're on for whatever
Right.
reason, whether it's your
Right.
political beliefs or who's paying you. I
Right.
mean, frankly, that's just the way it is. But you have to be very, very dedicated to that.
Right.
And
a lot of people became double agents. They would end
Sure.
up getting paid more by the other side and stay in the role they were in, and then gathering information for both. So it's an interesting aspect of that. I personally think that this episode says a lot about the character of Benjamin Sisko and how far he was willing to go because he was tired of seeing the deaths, tired of seeing the Federation being decimated.
Well, I agree with you, and I think if he hadn't chosen a side already, it's just a question of do you uphold those morals and those standards to the point of extinction,
Right.
or
Yeah.
do you
He's not going to
compromise?
join with the Dominion. He certainly is not going to join with the Cardassians. He has difficulty with the Klingons. The Romulans are difficult. It's a galaxy full of very difficult races of beings, and it makes for difficult choices. Just like at the end of Voyager, the last episode of Voyager, where you have the older Janeway who actually sacrifices her life to kill the Board Queen. And I don't want to give anything away. Well, no, everybody that's listening to this knows this. Yeah. But she makes that same kind of decision, and it's kind of a personal thing. But it's an interesting episode in that it sets the timeline right. It sets it back to what it should be. And so, again, there's some elements of that in her decision to do what she did, to go and find her younger self and to work this timeline issue, to save Tuvok, to save everyone, to not have them be another 22 years getting back to the Alpha Quadrant, and she sacrifices herself to that. So Sisko is my favorite captain, I have to admit. He's just an amazing individual, and Avery Brooks is an amazing actor because he can pull it off so well.
Yeah,
he really can.
I don't know. I guess this may be the first time that this has ever been done, but when I'm watching Sisko get to that point, for some reason it reminded me of the end of the first Dirty Harry movie, where Harry's comment is, man's got to know his limitations, and Sisko may have found his, or maybe he exceeded them. I don't know, but I found this strange parallel between those two characters at those two critical moments.
Well, and it's not the first time Sisko betrays his own morality. Yeah. Peter Allen Fields, who was the writer of this episode, he died in June of this year, and he wrote several episodes for Trek. In fact, he wrote one of my favorites on Next Generation, The Inner Light, which is just a superb episode. But he wrote another episode that Sisko takes it to the extreme, and that's For the Uniform, which is from season 5. And Sisko is going after Michael Eddington, who is now with the Maquis, and he actually moves forward in that episode at one point to release poisonous gases into the atmosphere of a planet just to catch Eddington, because he's so upset with this guy that this guy fooled him and then goes off to the Maquis. So he wants Eddington at all costs. So Fields wrote both of those stories. And
very dark stories.
Dark stories, the dark side of Sisko. And they're so For the Uniform is another one that's very interesting. And of course, Eddington dies later, but he doesn't die in that episode. He's captured. And he's a wily character. He has no compunction of doing what it takes. And so it's interesting. And also Fields was a writer on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And a little cute anecdote there is that the agents in Man from U.N.C.L.E. entered through a tailor shop. So what is Garrick? He's a tailor.
That's a nice way to end it.
Yes.
Guys, thank you. This has been really interesting. I think this has to be one of the very best episodes of DS9.
Oh, yes.
At all levels.
Yes.
And certainly counts among my Trek favorites, and I'm so glad that you picked it. I also have said this on the show a number of times, but what has been happening here as I've talked to my friends and had them pick episodes, I never know what they're going to pick. Some have picked very obvious choices. Some have picked very not obvious choices, but there's always a very special meaning to them. And so I really appreciate the fact that you picked this one and shared it with us.
We really enjoyed this. We hope to do another one if you ask us.
And we love tag teaming.
Yeah, well, we will definitely do another one. We will definitely do another one.
And I always have to bring this up. This year, this is a very important year for us because 40 years of marriage.
40 years.
Whoa, congratulations.
So that was June. So, now it's 40 years in 1 month. So
Yeah.
See what happens?
Yeah.
If you're a Star Trek fan.
Barb, you're a saint. That's all I have to say.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. No, I'm just kidding. No, we really enjoyed this, and I hope I brought something forward today. He gets to yap on these all the time, and so I thought I would bring forward my perspective on this, and just love these episodes. I love watching it again. I hadn't seen it in a while. I picked it So we watched it two times before this just to make sure we had it down.
We still haven't watched Discovery, any of the episodes.
We'll have to do that.
Yeah. Get to it. You will, if you enjoyed this, you will, and I'm hearing you enjoy DS9, you will enjoy Discovery. No question.
Great.
Good.
No question. Guys, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, Chuck. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Folks, this is Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner. I hope you enjoyed this one too. This was one I didn't see coming, but I thoroughly enjoyed rewatching the episode, and I enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you got something out of it. If you would like to share some of your thoughts on it, you can find us on Trek Favorites on Facebook. You can find us Trek Favorites on Twitter as well, and of course at TrekFavorites.com. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.